Good morning, everybody. My name is Howard Burns. I'm the editor of NJBIZ. Thank you for coming to our event this morning. Today we're going to discuss construction and development. And this morning I would like to introduce to you our moderator, George Vallone, who is the president and co-founder of the Hoboken Brownstone Company. Since 1980, the Hoboken Brownstone Company has been one of the leading multifamily developers on New Jersey's Gold Coast. With 38 years of experience across all facets of the development cycle, George and his partner have achieved national recognition for their dedication to sustainable community practices, environmentally conscious design, and revitalization of historic brownfield sites. Mr. Vallone is a past president of the New Jersey Builders Association, a founder and first chairman of NJBIZ's Mixed-Use Developers Affiliate. He has taught real estate finance and risk management at the Rutgers Graduate School of Business, the New Jersey Redevelopment Agency, the Rutgers Cook College Continuing Education Series, and the New Jersey Bar Association's Institute of Continuing Legal Education. It's my pleasure to introduce George Vallone.
Thank you very much, Howard, and thanks for everybody coming. Good morning, welcome. I actually thought this was the cannabis conference, and I brought my bong and my hookah, and I was just looking at the thing, and I said, oh no, we're talking about construction today. So, all right, we'll make a quick pivot. Not going to be as much fun, but we'll remember everything. So, NJBIZ, thank you to NJBIZ for putting this together. I don't know if many of you people know, but NJBIZ has been around for over 30 years. And they are the magazine of the business community, not just real estate, not just construction and development, but all facets. Here we're talking about a particular sector of the economy. Quick shout out to Anne Marie, the general manager. Thank you, Anne Marie, for herding us cats here together and organizing everything. Ken Kitselis, the publisher. I probably just butchered your last name, but anyway, Ken, thank you very much for what you do. Obviously, the publisher couldn't put the thing out without that. And Howard, who just introduced me. Thank you, Howard. That was a very nice introduction. You read it perfectly. So we're here to talk about construction and development. And to get started, we have a great panel. And I always think that I don't like reading people's bios. If anybody wants to read everybody's bio, they're right in here. Let's skip that. But I would like everybody to introduce themselves because I think they do it best. And just tell us, the usual thing, name, rank, serial number, what you do, and why you're here. So let's start off to my right with Scott.
Hi, my name is Scott Derco. I'm a partner at Citrin Cooperman. Our firm is ranked among the top 25 largest accounting firms in the country. We have offices throughout the Northeast. I work out of our Livingston, New Jersey office, and I head up our firm's construction practice.
Okay. Next up, Frank.
Good morning, Frank Jones, Mintz Insurance Agency, a trusted choice independent agent, operate out of Millville and operate in 27 states across the country. I'm here because I was asked to be here, and I'm thrilled to be here. NJBIZ puts on fantastic panels, and glad to be back again for this one.
Thank you. Stan?
Good morning. Stanley Koreyva, Amboy Bank. I'm president of Amboy Bank and chief operating officer, and we're a construction financing lender.
And Nevins? Oh, sorry, Stan. No, finish. Didn't want to cut you off. I thought that was a period, but it was a comma. Go ahead.
George is a client, by the way.
I have to be extra nice to Stan.
All I was going to say is in the heyday, we strictly did for sale financing because there was no apartment building back in the 2000 to 2008 era. And then the world changed. We all had our real estate challenges. And then back in 2013, we came back out lending in the construction to permanent in the multifamily world. And it is the hottest asset class out there, as we all know today. Thanks.
Thanks, Stan. Nevins?
Hi, Nevins McCann. I'm a partner at Connell Foley. I co-chair our real estate group. Connell Foley has probably one of the largest real estate practice groups for a law firm in the state of New Jersey. We operate out of a few offices here in New Jersey. Our main office is in Roseland, where I started working I moved over to Jersey City. I've been practicing for about 20 years. About 5 years after I started, I moved to Jersey City. And I'm sure everyone in this room knows that Jersey City has been a hot real estate development market for the past 15 or 20 years. But I'm happy to be here. The day doesn't start without reading NJBIZ in the morning, and it's nice to be with my old friend George Vallone here today.
Great. Thanks, Nevins. So we're going to start off sort of in a macro view. Let's talk about, where the action is. I mean, Nevins just pointed out that in terms of most of the work that he does and most of the work that I do, which is residential, it's pretty much concentrated on the Gold Coast. Probably Jersey City has now surpassed Hoboken for obvious reasons. Jersey City's 15 square miles. Hoboken's 1 square mile. When I started in Hoboken in 1980, I was buying brownstones on 3rd Street for $20,000. And you can't touch one now unrenovated for under $1 million. So Hoboken is pretty much done, other than the very north end, north of 14th Street, and maybe the rail yards and a couple spots down the west end. There are no large project sites left. And by the way, the north end is pretty much controlled by Rockefeller and Academy, and the south end over the rail yards is still this dream project that's been in the works for about, 30 years, Nevins, with Elcor?
Elcor, right?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, where the market action is in terms of, not just that sector, but the other sectors as far as what you guys are seeing. Why don't we start with you then, Nevins? We'll work our way back up.
So from a residential standpoint, it makes sense why Jersey City, Hoboken, and those areas are such hot real estate markets. When I left, I went to Georgetown undergrad, Villanova JD MBA. The first thing a lot of those students do from colleges and law schools and business schools is try to get a job up in the New York area. I was fortunate to be able to afford an apartment in New York for a little while, and then the prices obviously went through the roof. And then people started leaving Manhattan to go to Brooklyn. The old saying was, Brooklyn was about half of Manhattan, and Jersey City was about half of Brooklyn. Those numbers have changed slightly, but Jersey City, Hoboken, and the New Jersey Gold Coast, and as George was saying, it's starting to spill to the west side of Jersey City now for the first time. And just to put that into perspective, people are always concerned with the amount of building that's going on, the amount of units that are on the market, and is it going to be oversaturated? We really don't think so. I talked to all my clients, George, speaking to you as well. They are not concerned about the saturation, because every year people graduate and they come to get a new job, and they're not ready to buy. They're ready to rent just to see where they want to be. And so I feel that the hot real estate market is in and around New York City, whether it's up to Fort Lee or down further.
Stan, what do you think? You lend to not just residential. You're in all sectors, all food groups, or just one or two?
We are mainly a residential lender, but we're in a few food groups, as George says. We do hotel financing, nursing home financing in addition to the residential, but residentials are key. And this is why this is a panel of diverse opinions, because I totally disagree with my next door guy. Says we're never going to build enough. We will overbuild. Builders will never tell you that, because that's what they do. But there will be a point where there will be oversaturation, whether it's Jersey City or any of the other wonderful cities that are coming down the rail line, that will build too much eventually, and then the market will correct. Look at history. It happens all the time. The difference is this time it's rental. And then it's for sale is back. George and I have been on a few panels. When you're selling at $800 to $1,200 a square foot in Jersey City, it's time to take a look. For condominiums, that today is different than it was just a few short years ago. And I'm not telling you it's happening tomorrow, but builders will. It's what we do. Builders overbuild because that's what we do, and then the market corrects. Again, not today or tomorrow, but I think you'll see that there is so much in the approval stages in Jersey City alone that will come to fruition. But there's some wonderful communities coming down the rail line, East Orange and Bayonne, besides the Newark, that's happening today, that they have seen what has taken place. Rental, like I said, is the hottest asset class today in the apartment industry, but you all know from Amazon what's happening in the commercial industrial world. You can't touch one of those places today along the turnpike without paying a tremendous amount of money for the purchase of the land alone. But I would tell you the whole industry in financing for construction today is a great market. New Jersey is behind the whole country, but we've caught up as we speak. And I think we'll have a great couple of years before we start to really see the next recession. I'll stop there, George.
That's a good place to pause. Risk is really what drives the cost of capital, availability of capital, and cost of capital. So as those of us that practice in the real estate field know, you've got basically there's 5 risks in real estate development. You've got entitlement risk, is the property zoned for the intended use? Environmental risk, particularly in the urban areas. You've got historic industrial contamination you need to quantify and cost out. You've got construction risk. Can you build it for what you need to build it for? And you've got market risk. Can you sell it or rent it for what you need to rent it for? Those 4 risks all domino into the uber risk, which is financial risk. And that's all about, are we going to get capital committed? And if we are, what's it going to cost? So Stan is in the business of the construction loan, which goes up to 60-70% of your capital stack. So his risk profile is a little different than a developer's risk profile. I got to make sure that Stan gets repaid, that if I have a mezz loan, it gets repaid. I got to make sure my investors get repaid. And most importantly, I got to make sure I get repaid and that there's a profit left at the end of the day that justifies everybody's effort. So one of the ways we hedge risk is through insurance. And we have an insurance expert with us. And I'd like you to, Frank, if you could just take a few minutes to talk about how the different kinds of products that you offer help to hedge against risk.
Sure. For many, many years in the construction world, people were concerned with 2 things, liability and property. Make sure I don't have a loss to my property. If I do, it's going to be fully covered. And if there's a liability issue, I want to make sure I'm covered. Those have become, obviously, they're still important, but they're secondary to pollution liability, professional liability, which is an area of risk that has crept up in the marketplace, people didn't see coming, and then the other is cyber liability. So we do know that the risks have changed within the construction marketplace, and the battle for the insurance world is convincing the contractors, the GCs, the architects, and the like, that the risks have changed, in fact. So many of you in the room, I'm sure, are dealing with cloud-based systems on your plans, exchange of those. Architects and engineers, exchange those plans and design plans and all of the project paperwork that used to be in a nice, tidy roll delivered by a courier is now on a cloud-based system. There was an interesting case, Harleysville v. a funeral home, Hudson Funeral Home or Holman Funeral Home. And in that legal case, and I'm not speaking from a legal perspective, but from a risk perspective, what they found was that the exchange of the information through this project was not protected. And the risks that were put out there, in essence, they wound up waiving, the funeral home wound up waiving their rights by exchanging unsecured information. And it created a major issue for this project. Long story short, as Nevins can speak to, any case law, what I refer to as case law, that is going to now dictate future issues as decided by the court, has a great effect on the insurance industry. The carriers, those little statisticians that sit in a room and figure out potential loss costs, they look at potential risks growing. And although the properties have been secured, both in from fire, from theft, from all of the normal risks that property are typically at risk for, people have taken the proper steps to insure it. Liability, same thing. Contractors are more aware of what's going on the project. But what's happening with the cyber and professional is they're doing a lot more work that they never saw that coming. For example, you may be in the middle of a project and somebody changes the way that the plan is going to be administered. So they may change the structure slightly. That's going to be a professional liability risk. They may adjust a myriad of different things. That's a professional liability risk. A loss occurs. They want to know where the coverage is. It was a professional risk. No coverage. Carrier walks away. We're hated. The carriers are hated. And interestingly enough, people eventually get we get their attention. And then the cyber. It's two risks you wouldn't normally focus in on the insurance side. But that's pretty much, I mean, the pollution is a whole different issue. How many of you have yards where your folks are filling equipment with the oil, with gas, and then you depart that building because you grow? What's left in the ground is your responsibility. That does not come from general liability coverage. There's a number of things that people perceive as a sales tactic on behalf of insurance agents. And I know we're recording this, and I've said this publicly before, and I'll say it now. I joke with people, second to used car salesmen, people view insurance agents. And it's sad because I know that people are chasing a dollar. In this room, there are people chasing a dollar to the chagrin of everybody else in here. But we're not always selling. We're also managing our own risk. Because I don't want to be at a moment where one of you is working on a project of a lifetime, has an unexpected claim that's not covered because I didn't advise you appropriately, and then I get sued, and my errors and omissions get stamped, and I have to write a big fat check for my deductible. So it's an all-in kind of thing where the insurance carrier and agent has to mitigate the risk, has to manage the risk right. You have to manage the risk right so that people on the financial end are not left holding paper and not the green kind. So,
Okay.
excuse me. My voice.
Good intro. I wanted to go to Scott and to talk a little bit about tax laws, but I saw Nevins. Did you just pop me a little, I got a thought?
Yeah, I just
symbol?
wanted to
Go ahead.
follow up on Frank's comment. He's absolutely right. I mean, in law firms, you start seeing the trends coming because our groups start getting busier, right? Or we start adding a group. Cybersecurity was not a group that our firm had until probably a year or two ago. And the group's grown. We're tremendously busy. And you've seen the hacking going on around the world, cyber warfare. But what you see is incredible situations where if you say you're doing a transaction. We had a situation where we were wiring funds to another attorney's trust account, and they grabbed the wire in the middle, as it's going out.
Who grabbed it? The Russians?
We don't know yet, pal.
It was the Russians.
FBI's on the case. But the point is, it's astonishing, having done 100,000 closings, I feel like,
Never
something
happened
like
before.
that could happen,
Right.
And you did all the safeguards, but they're so sophisticated that you don't see it happen. I'm sure you've seen it at the bank.
Absolutely.
And but again, the professional malpractice insurance, our group is just as busy as it's ever been, from architects, engineers, on and on.
So did you ever get it back?
Portion.
And do you
to
have
cover
insurance
some.
that covers
we had
that
some
sort of thing?
insurance. We had to cover some, and it worked out.
Wow.
But, scary for all.
That's
all
very
involved.
scary.
Can I just interject here for one
Sure.
quick second?
Yeah.
And this is not to defend independent agents, but to defend independent agents. So what a lot of times
Did
happens...
anybody understand that?
Is, and this is really, so you sit with an agent who's competing. We independent agents for years have taught people to buy coverage based on price. It's the worst way to buy insurance. It is not a commodity. Make your agents work for it. But what happens is, because they're competing for price, they're advising on coverage. And what carriers have done over the years is they've developed these things called sublimits. So you'll have a policy with a sublimit of X for employment practices liability, a sublimit for cyber of $100,000. Well, the agent doesn't push a separate policy for the cyber, which would give you greater limits and deeper coverage. They're competing on price. They tell you cyber's in there, and that's usually enough of a comfort for somebody to say, okay, I have cyber coverage. They really don't know that it's very limited on the sublimit, not only on limit, but in the depth of coverage, and you end up with a claim, and you say, well, I thought I had this coverage. And then the agent, depending on the situation, and again, we're recording this, there is no insurance agent tap shoe retail shop, but some of them can tap dance pretty well. So, but you really got to pay attention to what you're getting, and please change the mindset. Don't buy on price, buy on coverage, and then work them down.
Good points. Every time he says this is being recorded, I get a little nervous. I'm not sure.
I do
I'm
too.
not sure
I do
why,
too.
but there's just something inside me that goes, "Uh-oh, I better be extra careful." Anyway, so Scott, you're a CPA, and you're also a CCIFP. What does that mean?
Certified Construction Industry Financial Professional.
Wow, awesome. So that now I know why you're here. So obviously, when I'm thinking about a project, tax planning is a big part of it. If I'm talking to investors and I'm trying to sell them on a condo deal, they know that condo income is ordinary income and it's going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. If it's a rental project, we know that we're going to build that building, operate it for a while, and sell it. Now it's capital gains. So tell us a little bit about the difference between, I know the tax laws now just changed things, so just bring us up to date a little bit on the difference between capital gains, ordinary income tax rates, and how you advise your clients in terms of characterizing income when it's a development deal, if there's certain tricks of the trade.
Well, the quick answer, capital gains rates are taxed at 20%. Ordinary is taxed at your ordinary rates, which are higher rates. With the new tax law that's come into effect, it's, everybody's digging into this, and there are a lot of tax planning opportunities, and I think there are a lot of opportunities that are favorable for construction and real estate. The new tax law it's slanted towards businesses, so there are a lot of opportunities there. Just to, go down some of the highlights that you hear about a lot in the news, one of the biggest things is the tax rates for C corporations have come down. The highest tax rate was previously 35%, now it's 21%. One thing you hear a lot of people say is, well, I'm just going to switch to being a C corp, but it's not that simple, and I think everybody in the room, if that's something you're considering, I think you need to do a side-by-side analysis with your accountant, because the answer isn't that simple. Just as an example, when you take money out of an S corp, assuming you have basis, it's tax-free. If you're a C corp, you're going to get taxed at ordinary rates because it's taxed as a dividend, so you're double taxed. So, just changing to a C corp, if you're pulling money out of your company, you could be, right back to where you were before, or even in a worse spot. So, it does require a lot of planning. Some of the rules that are favorable to construction, the new rules regarding depreciation. All assets that are under 20% have a 20-year life or less are subject to 100% bonus depreciation, which basically means you can write off just about everything in terms of capital improvements. That's a huge advantage for business and a great planning opportunity.
How did it used to be before that change? Because I always thought you could write off any depreciable asset over its useful life, and now you're saying there's this bonus?
Well, the bonus depreciation, you can write it all off now.
In 1 year?
In 1 year.
That's a beautiful thing.
So, as an example, you buy a 5-year asset, in the past, you would have to depreciate it over 5 years. You can get that whole bonus depreciation deduction right now. Like I said, it's a big tax planning opportunity. In real estate, it's a great opportunity, whether you're buying or constructing real estate. A great opportunity is to do a cost segregation study. For those of you who don't know what that is, if you buy a commercial building or you have a commercial building, depreciation for that building is 39 years. So basically, you're waiting 39 years before you can depreciate that whole asset. What a cost segregation study is basically it's a study where architects are involved and engineers, and basically what they're doing is they're looking at the plans for the building, the blueprints, and they're actually assigning lives to all of the components of the building. So a lot of those components that have a life over, under 20 years, there's an opportunity to write that cost off up front as opposed to waiting 39 years to depreciate that. So that's something that I would definitely recommend everybody look into if you're looking to buy or construct a building.
Hey, Scott,
Yes.
Can you also tell them about the site work? Because that also is part of this cost segregation, that you can actually, the infrastructure you put in the ground is a whole different world today than it was in the past.
Absolutely. Even things, certain outside work that you can do, like, for example, there's certain things on the outside of the building that depreciate over 15 years that you can look at writing that off as well. So it's definitely worth doing a study and seeing what you can write off now versus waiting over that 15, 20, 30-year life.
Yeah, I always, you finish?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I always look at depreciation as God's gift to real estate because it's an expense you get to write off that you don't actually write a check for. So the way it used to be, traditionally the depreciation was 29 and a half years? You could
27 and a half for residential.
27 and a half. So you could take your entire cost of your building and write it off in equal amounts for 27 and a half years. Breaking it down into its component parts gives you much faster depreciation because, you know, if the hot water heating system only has a 15-year useful life, why spread it out over 28 and a half when you could spread it out over 15? You're going to get a lot more tax savings earlier by breaking the building down into its components that have shorter useful lives than 28 and a half. So that's a huge win. Is there a recapture problem when you do the bonus depreciation? Because I know if you depreciated a building over 28 and a half years, is that 27 and a half? Okay. I was at a cannabis conference just yesterday, so I'm having trouble with my memory. 27 and a half, and then you sold the building and you accelerated. There's also ways you could do accelerated depreciation. So you didn't go straight line. You decided to accelerate, which means you took more than you were due early, but then, of course, you give it up at the end of the series of 27 and a half years. You'd have to recapture that accelerated depreciation. Is there any recapture with bonus depreciation?
Well, that is something that would have to be looked at. Again, any deal that you're looking at, you would need to do some tax projections and plan that out. So
Okay, so there's a potential for that.
Yeah, you'd have to look at that.
Okay, so if you're not planning on holding the building through the useful life of these components, there might be another issue you need to talk to your accountant about when you're planning for that sale down the road. So capital gains, 20%. Ordinary income, what's that at now, the federal?
Well,
maximum?
The rates have changed, but they've come down. The top rate now is 35%.
35.
So that's come down.
Okay. So the difference between capital gains at 20% and ordinary income at 35% is huge. That's a 15% swing. So if you can characterize income as capital as opposed to ordinary, you made 15% right off the bat. And one of the ways we do that is when we work with land sellers. One of the specialties we have is working with a land seller. We like to have joint ventures with land sellers because if they're willing to put their land in at as equity capital, we can value that land. And of course, anytime you have an appraisal, you know, if you're a banker's appraiser, you want it at the low end of the range because the banker wants to be conservative. If you're a developer's appraisal, you want it at the very high end of the range. And every appraiser has a little bit of professional judgment and a little bit of swing between. There's no absolute value. You can hire two appraisers for the same asset. They're going to come up with different numbers. So we can put land into a deal at a capital gains rate valuation at the high end of the spectrum, and then he's going to get capital gains treatment on that land on a higher amount than if he just sold it at the lower end of the spectrum, for example. So that's just one of the thoughts I had regarding accounting and the importance of hiring experts when you're planning on doing any kind of a real estate development deal. I always find that you really do get what you pay for, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a lawyer, whether it's an insurance agent, you get what you pay for. It's not about price, it's really about value and experience and expertise. And I've never hired a super smart lawyer and said, geez, I really wish I hadn't spent all that money on a super smart lawyer. He makes me think that, God, thank God I hired that guy, or thank God I had that insurance guy or that accountant. So, all right, so we talked a little bit about the macro view. We talked a little bit about risk. Let's talk a little bit about how deals get done. So, Nevins, what would you think, let's start with you, what would you think the most important ingredients are in a successful deal, to put a successful deal together? What do you look for? What do you advise your clients to do?
Well, for a project, obviously the location, right? You have to have a great location. You want to be oriented around mass transportation. That seems to be the biggest driver today, as you've seen through the expansion of markets such as Harrison, Newark, anything along a rail line. So I think location, mass transportation are the biggest things, because car ownership is down. I was saying to George earlier while we were talking, I was out at Airbnb headquarters recently, and they have so much data on every person, on every transaction that they do, that they identify trends before people even know that they're happening. It's no different than this Facebook stuff that you're hearing about. So they have a brain about where stuff is going. And they were saying that the younger millennials, and we were just talking about this, younger millennials are more interested in their persona that they get to put on Facebook, Instagram, and whatnot, that they don't really, gravitate towards home ownership, that they gravitate towards having a place to stay, and they can launch from there. That's why they like the urban areas, and they can go travel the world. They'll Airbnb or VRBO their unit to another unit somewhere around the world. So it's a fascinating dynamic. But back to the deal terms, it's location, it's mass transit, and your partners. I mean, you have to have great, solid partners, and we've all seen when you don't have those what happens. So.
Mm-hmm. Stan, we've got rising interest rates and lower tax rates, and everybody needs as much construction money as they can get. How are those things kind of coming together in your mind in terms of the kinds of deals you're looking to do and your underwriting standards?
Just as a point, I think Nevin hit it on the perfect about the location, but it also comes about price. And then from the price, it comes to your capital stack, George, you mentioned earlier. Today, people like Amboy Bank and other construction lenders are wanting to lend you less and less. We want you to bring more equity to the table. So capital stacks from the 2005 era, we would lend you 80% of cost. And believe, based on the appraisal, everything would have been wonderful, never come down. And then the world changed on all of us. So today, I will tell you 65% to 70% max is what we'll lend you as a first mortgage lender in the construction financing. And then from there, whether it's all equity or mezzanine financing, George, you alluded to earlier, behind us, and then the equity. So we're seeing new capital stocks as 60 to 65% from a bank, 20 to 25% from a mezz or equity from a second party, and then the third party being you as the sponsor for the differential, whether it's 20 to 25%. That is becoming more and more the norm. And the key question is, well, will that be recourse financing? And the answer is no. If we're only doing 60 to 65, we'll go to non-recourse financing, which is a totally different change from the 2005 era, George. And from that perspective, you still are the one at the end of the day that needs to come to the table if there's a hiccup. So whether it's you or your mezz, at the end of the day, though, your lender is becoming more and more risk averse, and not just because we want to, it's because we have no choice. The regulatory world has changed significantly. Regulators hate the word construction. It's a four-letter word. Condos is even a bigger four-letter word, although that's coming back.
Condos, exactly. 5.
Yeah, that's the point.
George, let me just jump in real quick, please.
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me is I'm representing some developers on condo deals, some on rental deals. Talk about mezzanine financing. What's the mezz rate for a condo deal as opposed to a rental deal?
That's an excellent question, Nevins. And it depends on who the sponsor is. There's not I'll give you a range, okay?
Yeah.
So I am seeing today, we think we're expensive at a prime plus 1 on average rate. You're seeing mezz financing from 12 to 18%, depending on the structure, the sponsor, the actual project. So the safer the project, the better the rate. The more equity you have and the better the balance sheet, the better the rate. But if it's just the opposite, the higher the rate. And by that, that's just the rate. Then you got to pay 3 points just to get the deal, right? So this is the most expensive money out there. But yet, is it cheaper than equity? Because if we're seeing equity financing, they're going to give you, a tremendous amount of money, but they want 75% or more of the deal.
So just in case anybody out there is not familiar with mezzanine financing, let me give you like 30 seconds on mezzanine financing. So your capital stack is the total amount of money you need to build a project. It's basically made up of hard costs, soft costs, and land costs. Okay, that's your capital stack. I got to be able to fund all three: my land costs, my hard costs, and my soft costs. Somebody screaming in the background? Does anybody need help?
Okay, if everybody can start making their way up to their seats.
No, we're already in our seats. And nobody gets to leave to go to anybody else's seats. All right, we'll ignore that. So the way you do that is you use leverage. And what Stan's talking about is the baseline of the leverage. So the construction loan is going to get you up to 65, 70% of your construction stack, your capital stack. But then let's say it's 60%. Then the developer's got to come up with 40% more. So he's got two choices. He can either use equity, all cash, investor equity, or he can layer in a mezzanine layer. Think of a mezzanine in a theater. You got the front row seats, that's where the developer sits. Then they're the most expensive. It costs the most for equity capital for a developer and his investors. That costs the most. You got to give them a preferred return on their money, which can be 8, 10, 12%, and then a big chunk of the profits. How much profits? Depends on how risky the deal is. If you've reduced those risks, the chunk of the profits and the pref rate is going to be lower, and vice versa. So the way you cut down on that equity requirement is you put in a mezzanine debt layer. It's debt, but it acts like equity because typically it's not secured. The developer does not put a mortgage, does not give the mezzanine lender a mortgage. The banker always gets the first mortgage. The mezz guy may ask for a second, but typically they don't. And it's non-recourse. Non-recourse is like one of the things that makes my heart flutter. When I was younger, it was a very nice-looking woman, but nowadays it's non-recourse financing that gets my heart going. So mezz debt gets you from, let's say, 60% to 80%. You can get a 20% mezz layer, and it'll cost, as Stan said, based on the risk of the deal and the net worth of the borrower, the developer, those mezz rates can go 8, 10, 12, all the way up to maybe 18% if it's a really high-risk deal. So by using mezz debt on top of your construction lender, you can get all the way up to as close as 90% of your capital stack. So now the developer and his investors only have to put up 10%. And typically what I do with my investors is I'll do a 90-10 or an 80-20, which means of that top 10% of the capital stack, I may only put up 1 or 2%, and my investors will put up 8 or 9%. That's how we fill the capital stack. And mezzanine debt is a great way to do that because it's cheap. The interest rate's high, but there's no percentage of the profit. It's just straight interest. So what I usually do is if I think the deal has a very high upside, I layer in mezz debt because it's straight interest and no share of the profits. And I minimize investor capital where I do have to give a big share of the profits. If I'm a little bit like this is not going to be a home run, this may be a double or a triple, then I'll use less mezz and I'll use more equity because the mezz has got to get its rate before you get to share any profits with your investors. So that was more than 30 seconds, sorry. Let me go back to insurance for a second here because insurance it's interesting because back in the day, I guess it was before 1986. In 1986, the doo-doo hit the fan because of environmental claims being made against general liability policies. So up until 1986, and correct me if I got the dates wrong, I think it was 86, right? Yeah. So up until 86, if you had a general liability policy and you had an environmental problem, you could go against your GL policy because it covered all risk. After that, something happened in 86, maybe Scott knows what it was, but something happened, and they came in with what's called the APE clause, absolute pollution exclusion. Every GL policy had an APE clause that said, we'll cover all your problems, but not environmental risks. And that brought environmental insurance as a new product into the industry, because now you needed both. You needed general liability and you needed environmental liability. So tell us a little bit about, sort of elaborate on that, and tell us now that that there's this whole new line of insurance that's covering environmental risk, how you deal with that, how you sell that, how you quantify that, how you price that.
Okay. Well, the one thing that happens in the insurance marketplace is where really the carriers are like lemmings. Once one carrier makes a decision to go to cover a certain risk, the rest follows suit. And that is certainly true in the environmental side. So years ago, when this change was made to the GL policy, environmental pollution policies is what we'll call them, were very, very expensive. And very few people saw the need to purchase additional policies. Even though they knew their GL didn't cover it, it was never going to happen to them. As the marketplace evolved, and to where we are today, is environmental policies is a very competitive marketplace. There are many carriers who are knocking on our doors saying, we want the environmental business for your contractors. Now, the premium is really driven based on the known data for a specific industry segment. So, for example, a GC may not drive as high a premium as, let's say, a supply hauler. It's going to be different. It's the environment at the location, not the project, but at the insured's location or locations is typically a different environment. There are different activities occurring there. It's truly a use-based, if you will, premium. So it's not an environmental risk or pollution policy is going to be driven based on complete revenue, no matter what the exposure is. It's a whole lot different. So right now, the reason why it's so easy to have that discussion is because the policies have evolved, even in the coverage form, to be broader, to have higher limits, and to really address the true exposure of a given contractor. So it's a whole lot easier to have that discussion now than it was before. Did I answer your question?
I got another one coming.
Go ahead.
That was good, though. But there's another one coming.
Yep.
So in the beginning, God made man. No, we're not going that far back. In the beginning, you could get cost cap insurance and you could get liability insurance. Cost cap insurance basically said, okay, if I got a cleanup, I've investigated it, I know what's there, I got a cleanup plan approved by the state, it's $10 million. I could buy an insurance policy that says, okay, we're going to cover you if it goes over. If it was $10 million was the estimate, we're going to say, all right, you're going to eat the next million, and then over $11 million, we're going to cover you. There was a huge problem up in the Meadowlands with a company called Cherokee on a development deal called NCAP, and it blew the whole cost cap insurance market out of the water. It's starting to come back a little bit. I was at a conference in Charlotte. There's a company out there now called Beasley that's starting to offer it again. It's expensive, and the deductibles are high. That's cost cap insurance. It's back, but it has limited applications in my mind. And in most instances, at least in my opinion, I hope the guys at Beasley aren't here, it might be better to just self-insure. By the time you pay the premium and you eat the deductible, you probably, if your team is good and you did a thorough investigation and you know what you got, you probably should self-insure. But PLL, Pollution Legal Liability Insurance, which covers unknown risks, is another whole story. Can you tell us a little bit about, you're going to say whatever you'd like to add about cost cap, but I'd like to hear about PLL in particular.
Well, cost cap will leave where it is because, at the end of the day, insurance is a financial animal, no matter what product we're talking about. So a carrier has to be able to make money. Now, for those of you who don't know, insurance companies don't make money typically on the premium collected. The money's made on investment. That's why when the economy tanked, insurance, we hit what's called a hard market in the insurance world, where the carriers say, we're not flexing on premium, we're bumping it up, we need to get rate because we're not making the investment income. Where prior to the economy tanking, they were operating at about 103.5% loss ratio. So for every premium dollar paid, they were paying out $1.03 in claims. But the investment income was so great, that's how they made money. Still how we make money, just a little bit different on how it's weighed out. But the PLL, the cost cap is, Beasley does have a product, and you'll see many others following. It's a little bit different than it was before. So it's not the exact same product as you probably heard.
How's it different?
So they're taking on less of the risk than the initial program did years and years ago.
Meaning higher deductibles?
Yeah, higher deductibles. And they're not going to be, you're going to have to really validate the increased limits. I mean, really validate the increased limits. So I'll leave that where it is. But the PLL, your question directly on the PLL was the flexibility, the limits, and what they're doing in the marketplace?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess to better understand the marketplace is to really engage in the discussion, a specific discussion with regard to carrier form. The carriers will craft, by and large, really anything that you need. We have insureds that don't want to spend $1 on premium. So they have the carriers chew away what they can, and some carriers won't offer less than what they typically do, so have to go to a secondary market.
Oops.
So,
sorry about that.
That's okay. They could be as deep a coverage as you can imagine, or it can be as basic as you could craft. The problem is when you start chewing away coverage, it's usually those cases that end up having a claim that would have been covered otherwise, and we end up in litigation. Isn't that right, Nevins? Yeah. So and I don't know if there's any really specific. I mean, you asked the general question.
Yeah, I got a specific one coming.
Go ahead.
So a lot of people here, and not everybody here is a developer. Some of you may be here as property owners, and you may be here as advisors to property owners. And so for me, pollution legal liability in a development scenario is a must-have because it's relatively inexpensive. And if you're remediating a large development site, you could do the most thorough job in the world. You could do soil tests by every 30 by 30 foot quadrant, and you still could miss something. So to have a PLL coverage, PLL is basically there for unknown risks. If you miss something, you did a thorough job, but you missed something. That's when PLL comes in, unknown risks. I heard recently that I'm thinking about this condo project, and the number one thing nowadays is you sell a condo project, you turn over control to the condo association, and the board sues the developer. That's sort of the thing now. We have a new line item in the budget, HOA litigation defense line item. And so I'm thinking that a lot of those claims, not a lot of them, but some of the claims that I've heard about have to do with environmental impacts as a result of construction defects. So for example, the roof leaks, the leaking happens behind the walls, nobody knows about it for a year or two, and all of a sudden somebody discovers mold. Is that the kind of thing that we could use a PLL? Should I build a PLL for those kinds of risk, environmental impacts, potentially linked to construction defects? And for a building owner who's just bought a new building, is that something they should consider?
Okay, the answer to your last question is absolutely. And they are risks that you need to be aware certainly creep up. There is a joke in the insurance industry that says if you ever want to avoid E&O risk, never write a condo association.
They got some sense of humor, these insurance people, don't they? You just broke that crowd up with that little quipper.
So
I guess you got to be in the business to appreciate certain kinds of jokes. But anyway, go ahead. Nice try.
I tried. That was a flair. But the truth of the matter is that is an understanding. It's always the unknown risk, right? So you're managing unknown risk. Nobody that I've ever met with at any level, any size, have ever said, "Yeah, I think I got a gap in this area, that area." It's never ever been said to me. They always feel like they have everything covered, not just with insurance policies, but they have proper protocols in place, and that's not going to happen to us. And yeah, we manage against that, and they're usually the claims that come up. That is a major issue. Because once you hand the keys off and walk away, construction defect is not something insurance responds to. And so when we went through the major housing boom, and you had all these tract homes, and you had homes being built quicker than you and I could go to the men's room, you had concerns at the time in the insurance marketplace with completed operations coverage. In New Jersey, it wasn't coming from any real cases with regard to construction defect, but was being driven by activity out in California. And as the insurance marketplace, certainly on the agent side, is saying, time out a second. That's California's issue. We don't have that issue here in New Jersey, and we don't have it in Delaware, we don't have it in Maryland, we don't have it in Pennsylvania. What's the deal here? Well, now that we're many years past the building boom, let me tell you, construction defect has become a noose around the neck of many agents who lived and died, and carriers, mind you, on residential construction, because there have been myriads of construction defect claims, and unfortunately, the agent has to step back and let the carrier get into that dogfight because there's no coverage for construction defect. So that's another thing you really need to be concerned with, is the quality of what's being done out there as well. Not only you, if you're a GC, but your subs. But one thing I just want to remind everybody is insurance. I heard this quote somewhere before. Mm-hmm. I've never forgotten it. Insurance is the oxygen of our economy. Now, if anybody's taking notes for today, please attribute that quote to me, and it'll be mine forever. But that's the insurance is the oxygen of our economy. It takes the financial protection for consumers. It invests in the infrastructure of the United States, from real estate to bonds and stocks. So we're investors. And also helps employers mitigate claims and manage employee risk as well as project risk. So play a major role in the economy.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And by the way, he meant to say quicker than you go to the men's room or ladies' room.
Yes, correct.
Just to be politically correct. So, Scott, I want to go back to something you said earlier about corporate structures, C Corps versus LLCs. When I got started 38 years ago, there were no LLCs. It was LPs. We used to use limited partnerships, and the reason was that it was not a taxable entity. The taxes flowed through to the owners of the LP, so you only paid tax once. Can you talk a little bit about double taxation? Are LLCs still the best form to build and own property in? How do you advise your clients about corporate structure?
LLCs are a preferable way to structure a company from the standpoint that it is easier to pull money out of the company when you're structured as a corporation. It's a little more difficult. There are more things you need to look at. When you're looking at C Corp versus S Corp, when you're looking at a C Corp, probably not the best structure to structure a real estate company because, again, as you're pulling money out, you're double taxed. So, from a planning standpoint, you always do want to look at all the options and look at the business plan and really understand what the intent of the owners are in terms of holding it, flipping it, whatever you plan on doing. So it's important to understand what the overall game plan is and really looking at all your options. But an LLC is still probably...
It's still the best way to do, and to own real estate, not just to build and develop real estate, but also to own it?
It is a more preferable way, just for the reason that I said. It is easier to pull money out. There are less hoops you need to jump through. So, but again, with any structure that you're looking at, you really want to take a step back and look at what the intention of the business is, what are the long-term plans, and really talk it through from there.
Stan, do you have any rules about whether your borrower should be an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp? Does it matter to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, George. You hit it on the nose. The real key is, starting from where Scott left off, you want every single project to be a separate LLC, not just from a liability perspective and from an accounting perspective, but from a legal liability and from a lending perspective. We're going to look at each project separately, and we're going to lend to that project as a separate LLC and look for the cash flows eventually from that LLC to come from that. If you make everything under one name in every project, forgetting all the legal and all this stuff, we're going to then look at that in total, and we can only lend so much. Any one bank can only lend so much to any one sponsor from a concentration and from a legal liability from a lender perspective. So, but every LLC individualizes, looked at that specifically, and then we can lend to each project specifically for that. So, George, your question is right on. It's key, from my perspective, to keep them all separate from the accounting and separate from the liability perspective, and even the insurance.
And let's talk about products, Stan. So construction loans are what you use to build buildings, but then there's end loans. And if it's a condo, you're giving a mortgage to every condo buyer. And if it's a rental building, you're giving a big permanent mortgage on the entire building. Let's talk about condos to begin with. What are you looking for in terms of down payment from the condo buyer? How much do they have to put down, and where are the rates at? Can you still get a 30-year mortgage? Give us a little bit of what the market's looking like for condo buyers.
So George has gone to the end now, permanent as an individual. But just for a moment, one step back, George. Yeah. The construction to perm, and there is the perm to individual, but you still have the construction loan on a condominium. Mm-hmm. So your banker is going to give you interest only, and then as you sell that out, and then to the individual, whether it's any bank today, permanent loans are back for condos. There are some expert lenders out there who strictly do the condominium and financing, but it's hard up front because lenders don't want to lend until, it's a sad statement, 50% of the condominium is sold out. Now there are certain prerequisites that it's down to 33, I've heard, 35%. But at the end of the day, the lender does not want to lend until they see it is a project that actually has sustainability and it's successful. So therefore, to get those first end loans for condominium projects is very hard, and that's why you see some of the major public, the Toll Brothers and the KHOB, they hack their own mortgage financing companies, so they provide that, versus the Wells of the world and cities that do that really, really well for the condominium world. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, in a rental project you started with, George, from a construction to perm, your best bet is to get one construction to permanent mortgage. So you do it one time, pay one time, and then figure out at the end of the day, after you rent it, stabilize it, what's your best permanent loan you can get to cash out all the equity that you put in earlier on, and figure that out based on your NOI and the debt service coverage from there, separate from the cap rate.
And typically stick with apartment building mortgages, permanent mortgages on. So typically they'll have a term, an amortization period, and then they'll have a term after which you need to refinance it. What's the range on those two numbers?
So sure, your term is usually anywhere from, on average commercial bankers, 5 to 7 to 10 years max from a term perspective. The amortization will, though, apartments are the best, 30-year amortization. I've seen and heard others starting to get even higher, but for the most part, at least in New Jersey, it's a 5 to 10-year term and a 30-year amortization. A 5-year rate today is higher than it was a year ago. Right, rates are finally starting to creep up. Your 5-year Treasury today, let's just call it 275 for respective purposes of just a benchmark. Add on average 150 to 200 basis points over there from any lender who's in a permanent world of financing multifamily. That's today's.
So you're a little under 5%.
Yeah. Now you could get a
permanent
5-year rate a year and a half ago at 3%. Especially those who are trying to pull market share out there and growing their banking business. But today, it's 450 to 5 for a 5% mortgage for a 5-year term, right, out there. And then you have the bankers fighting for best sponsors, best projects, especially location. As Nevin said earlier, it's just amazing what you can do. No different than insurance, your leverage. But at the end of the day, you want someone you can depend on. No different than your insurance guy. You want to know someone who's going to be able to provide that loan at the end of the day.
And that's fixed for the 5-year term, right?
Oh, and absolutely fixed.
Fixed rate term.
Yeah.
So the bank is buying a little bit of interest rate risk over the 5-year term. So is the amortization period, if it's 30 years, you said maybe you could go longer, maybe you could go shorter. Is that something a borrower can just request? Like if I want to make more cash currently, I want a 40-year term. If I'm not so much interested in cash flow, I'm interested in paying off the loan as possible, I want a 15-year AM. Is that something I can just ask for and you'll just say okay?
Well, I'm absolutely going to say okay if you want a shorter amortization. If you want a longer amortization, I'm going to say wake up, George. No, because that's not going to be in New Jersey for the most part. I don't see that here. I see that out in California potentially and some others, but 30-year is kind of the max. 25-year is very safe, but we have certain clients that want less. They depending on what George said, your cash flow. But for the average, 30 is the norm. Less is wonderful for a bank because you're paying back the loan faster and you're getting more equity, but you're paying us back, which we love.
Yep. And debt service coverage ratios, they still at 1.2?
No. For multifamily, we're seeing more on average 125. From especially for non-recourse, George. That's the whole key. We started at 120 when we came back out, but we raised our minimum to 125 for non-recourse. In multifamily. If you're not multifamily, you're in the commercial world, whether it's be office, retail strips, you'll see it even higher, 130 to 135. Hotels are in that range also. If you're looking for permanent non-recourse financing. But on average, George, for today that we're seeing, 125. Now, I'm not saying you can't find it less, but that's the norm.
And for those of us out there that don't do this day in and day out, the debt service coverage ratio, Stan, that's the mortgage payment divided by the NOI, right? You want to make sure there's 25 or 35% more operating income coming in than you need for your payment.
That's right. So in my simpler terms, you need $1.25 for every of the NOI for every dollar of payment to pay your bank.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And by the way, I think before we heard Frank, you guys are the engines who build all this. But your banker who gives you the construction financing is the fuel. So you have your oxygen, you're the engine, but you still need the fuel, right? And that's what's so wrong with regulatory today. They don't understand that you need this to build. It is such a diverse in terms of trying to figure out how to move forward. You got the regulators on banks saying, no, but yet you need financing to build. Very few people can build for cash. So that is always the struggle today, more than ever. We're fighting through all this. But the key is what you guys do is truly the engines to fuel the growth of the economy.
Nevins, any thoughts on lending, and particularly since I'm about to do one, condos and financing for condos? What are you seeing? What are the banks asking the condo buyers to put down? What kind of mortgages are they looking at?
Well, we just heard it from the horse's mouth, but that's why I brought up the question about mezzanine. I have clients that are, have mezzanine rates for condos at 22%, which is incredible, whereas their multifamily deals are in the 12 to 14% range. It's a dramatic difference, and just goes to show you they've been bitten there in the past.
So wait a minute, I'm confused. I'm talking about a condo buyer, a person who buys the condo.
Oh, so
they're not mezz lenders for condo buyers.
Nope. So,
Too bad. That's actually a great idea, but anyway.
So condo buyers, yes, the amount you're putting down has gone up,
Yep.
right? And with the change in the tax law, the loss of the deduction of your interest payments and your taxes has had a dramatic impact on your purchasing power.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just an inverse formula. You know, if you were going to spend $1 million on a place before December 31st, and you knew what you could afford, well, that drop that down about 10% because you're losing your deductions for interest and your premium interest on the loan. So that should have a negative impact on pricing, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm in the market of buying a new house. You know, I wanted to buy something in X range. It's now going to be X range minus 10, 12%. Mm-hmm. So that's an issue out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
George, to be specific, and never
Yeah,
a mortgage cap last year was $1 million. Where you went a moment ago, now it's $750,000.
Right.
So anything you borrow today more than $750,000, you're not getting that interest deduction. So that's just what you said on the issue dealing with the amount of how far one will spend on a condominium in Jersey City at $1,000 a square foot.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a property tax deduction limit, right?
Limit.
Yep.
10?
Yeah. Well, you're capped in total between interest and property taxes at, I believe, $10,000. Scott?
I thought it was 10,000 each.
No.
What's the limits?
It's 10,000 you're capped at for real estate and state taxes.
What about
Oh,
interest?
yes, that's right. No, that's separate.
Interest is
that's
separate.
That's separate.
So interest, you can deduct up to a $750,000 mortgage. You can deduct all the interest. And property taxes up to?
Property taxes and state taxes, you're capped at 10,000, which
Right.
is a big deal in New Jersey and a lot of high-income states. I mean, you look at a lot of towns, most people are paying more than $10,000 for their real estate taxes. So, there was that big push at the end of the year where people were trying to prepay their taxes in order to maximize that deduction. But, going forward, you're capped at 10,000. So there are some people that are going to take a hit. But, the rates also came down. So, in some of the models that we've run, some people have still come out in the same place, but, you do have other people that are going to be paying a little more, depending on your real estate taxes as well as, it's a higher income state. So you're paying more in state taxes. So, those people may wind up actually paying a little more in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, places like that are high income states.
I thought it was so funny when the tax law got changed and the guys down in Trenton's trying to come up with all these ideas to game the system. And one of the ideas was, well, you won't have to pay your property taxes as property taxes. You'll pay it as a charitable donation. Now, I always thought most of my property taxes, which support a bunch of wasteful bureaucrats, was a charitable donation anyway that I could never write off. But I thought that was creative, very creative. Completely ridiculous, but creative. Anyway, I digress. So back to that last point. So you're saying that the $10,000 is property taxes and what other kind of state taxes?
Your state taxes, your income tax.
Your income tax. So whatever you pay in income taxes to the state, you can write that off, and whatever you pay in property taxes, you can write that off, but only up to $10,000.
Only up to 10,000.
Okay, got it. So what we need to do is we need to move out of New Jersey. No, I shouldn't say that. This is NJBIZ magazine. I shouldn't say that. But actually, to that point, talk a little bit about clients that they own businesses here, they're making money here, but they want to go to a no-income tax state. There's some restrictions on that, right, that they need to be aware of, and it's apparently it's pretty stickler type stuff.
Well, particularly, that conversation comes up when you're talking about people who are getting close to retirement. Mm-hmm. New Jersey's a very expensive place to live with property taxes and things like that. So, that's always something that comes up where, is New Jersey the right state to retire in? Some of the things that, the state has been doing to offset that is, things like, retirement income deductions on the state returns. They're trying to do things to make New Jersey, more attractive and try to, slow the exodus of people that are retiring to move to low-tax states. But that's a problem, particularly for people that are getting close to retirement or in retirement.
Hey, Scott, can
Yeah.
you though clarify, I think, to George's question, even if you're a Floridian resident, but you have income-producing property in the state of New Jersey, where and how are you going to get taxed on that income, is, I think, George's question.
It was.
To be perfectly honest, that's something that I would have to get back to.
What I heard, and I've seen people do it, is they move to Florida, and as long as they live there for 6 months and 1 day, which means they're there more than they are here, they don't pay income taxes here because they're a resident of Florida. Is that wrong?
You got it somewhat right. It's
Okay.
6 months in a day outside of New Jersey.
Right.
You don't have to be actually in Florida 6 months a day. As long as you're outside of New Jersey 6 months in a day. And Scott, I'm not 100% sure, but I think you're still going to get taxed. I wasn't sure. It's not my world, but I think you're going to get still taxed as income-producing property and get a New Jersey tax, even if you're a Floridian or a Delaware resident. I think that's the real issues you have to fight through, if I may.
Those are things that you would definitely have to do some tax planning and do some projections and project that out. But that is something that you would have to plan out, absolutely.
Well, this is the point where the panel gets to ask the audience a question. Does anybody know the answer to that question? No. All right. Here's what we're going to do. There's going to be a nice article about today, and we're going to have that question answered for you, and it will be in the article. So the next issue of the magazine is a must-read, and I am, for one, going to read that because I want to get that straight.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
2 weeks out. Anticipation. Okay. So we are going to open it up now for questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions? Anybody want to ask something about what was already said or something brand new? Right over here.
Interesting sort of...
Could you do me a favor? Could you just stand up and tell us your name and what you do?
Hi, James Kenoy, real estate investment banking.
Okay.
It was interesting to see sort of like the bifurcation between the mezz rates on multifamily versus condo. And I'm wondering if you guys are, what your thoughts are on using a ground lease structure to sort of do that instead, to achieve higher leverage, lower your lending rate.
Great question. Stan, ground leases? How's that work? How do you get a first mortgage on a piece of property where the developer doesn't own the dirt?
You don't.
There you go.
But there are leasehold improvements, all right? So very few banks will do that. They shy away because you've just made it more complex. We actually have done leasehold improvement where you attach the lien on that, George. But that is very hard. It makes it one step level. Most banks will shy away from a ground lease. It's just not what we like. We like a first mortgage on a property that's that if something goes sideways, unfortunately, it's a lot easier to take possession and move forward. With a ground lease, the complexity just becomes too hard for a bank to fight through.
So instead of a first mortgage on the land, you get a first lien on the improvement, sort of like a UCC agreement?
We'll take an assignment of the leasehold. Of
the improvements.
Yep.
So it's weird because in New York City, this has been going on for 200 years. Yeah. I mean, the richest of the rich people, of the rich families in New York City are the ones that, their great-grandparents bought land when it was still pretty rural in Manhattan and never sold it. They long-term leased it. They'd lease it for 99 years. I wish my great-grandparents did that. So in New Jersey, it just isn't happening, and I'm not sure why. I own 3 blocks of land in Jersey City right now, fully approved for about 1,200 units. 3 separate blocks. I had a developer come in and pitch me exactly the idea that you just pitched me. He says, I want to do a 98-year land lease, and we worked out all the terms. Basically, the rent came out to about 5% of the purchase price. So the purchase price, if you wanted to buy the whole site, was about $100 million. The rent was going to be $5 million a year. It was going to go up. I think it was 2.5% a year, compounding. And then every 20 years, we were going to reset it to market value. Worked out the whole deal. Everybody was very satisfied. And so the guy signed a contract, smart, because he said subject to financing. He gave himself a financing contingency for, I think, 60 days, if I'm remembering correctly. Couldn't finance it. Could not finance it. Could not find a lender that wanted to buy that deal.
But George, you hit it on the nose, and based on your question, if you stop paying your lease, what happens? the landowner takes control.
I thought it was a great deal. I was hoping he stopped paying his rent after he built all the buildings.
Now, I have a mortgage on the building, but what good is that? I don't own the land. This is why it gets sideways.
But I would still make your payment.
I think construction and existing buildings are two different things, especially when you're talking about multifamily or condo, because the agencies will view the leasehold finance as a standalone from the ground. If you look at Fannie Mae's data sheet of existing loans, I mean, there's a column on there that says, is this an application of lease rent? It's something that they can wrap their heads around in terms of existing products. But there are people out there who will find public companies, REITs, insurance, that will do leasehold financing for construction.
Oh, I totally agree with you, but you're at another level. You're in the big boy and big lady world, if I may be so. Not in what I would call the private building world. And you'll see that more in public and private partnerships, more than ever. But not normally in, a one property building 50 to 150 rental apartments or condos.
But Stan, if what I'm sorry, I forgot. James, if what James is saying is that Fannie Mae will buy those loans on the secondary market from you. Now, maybe I don't mean you like Amboy Bank you. I mean you generically as a banker. If you're a banker that just wants to originate loans and then sell them off, get your money back, and go lend it out again, and Fannie Mae will buy them on a leasehold, why do you think bankers would be reticent to want to do that?
Well, because that stops our growth, right? So I'm just a broker at the end of the day, and I'm churning and I'm making.
Well, you
fees.
hold your loans though, right, Amboy?
That's right.
You
And
hold your loans.
Most banks will hold their loans. There are other banks that will just, especially on the end condominium,
Yep.
they'll just originate and then sell this service to a third party. But for the most part, we want to grow, so we want to hold.
Right.
So that's opposite of what the thought process would
Yeah,
be.
yeah. Well, that makes sense. Question in the back.
Hi, yeah.
Tell us your name and what you do.
David, I'm a surety bond underwriter
Okay.
for travelers. And I just wanted to talk about construction defect insurance or coverage.
Okay.
A surety bond, if you're a developer, will cover up to 1 year warranty period standard.
We'll cover up to what? Can you put the
1
mic a
year.
little closer?
A 1 year warranty period after the construction of the project is
Okay.
completed, and you can get extended warranties built into the contract.
So in New Jersey, we have a homeowner warranty requirement. So if you're a builder of new homes, and that includes condos, townhouses, single-family homes, you have to provide a 10-year warranty for your homeowners. I'm just giving you a little background, and then I'm going to come back to you. Year one, the developer basically guarantees everything. I mean, nail pops. I'm going to come in and redo your sheetrock at the end of year one for nail pops. Everything. Year 2, 3, and 4, it's mechanical and structural, and year 5 through 10, it's structural, and that includes your roof. So it's a declining obligation. So are you saying that you can get a bond only for year one, or you could get it for those declining obligations through the entire 10-year period? Mike, we need a mic. Everybody needs to hear you. Oh, the mic left you already. All right. Stand by. We don't want to miss a scintillating word of this answer.
You bond the GC, and then the GC can bond their subs, but ultimately it's the GC's responsibility for the entire project.
But I thought you issued those bonds. I thought you're the one that's insuring
We stand
that
behind
risk.
them. So if they go out of business, they default, there's a dispute between the developer and the GC, we step in.
Oh, so you're basically insuring the guy who's insuring me. So I'm going to get. Is that correct?
It's a three-party agreement.
Between
The,
let's say me, the developer, my general contractor,
and the surety.
and you.
Right.
Okay. So what I have to remember then is I have to make sure that my contract with my general contractor has those warranty obligations built into it. And then I have to make sure that he's got a guy like you backing him up in case he goes under.
Correct.
I got you.
But a 10-year warranty would be tough. You could probably get 2, 3, maybe 5.
I mean,
Sure.
one is the biggie because that's basically everything.
And that's standard.
2, 3, 4, 5, it's just, as I said, it's just mechanical and structural.
George, that's not reality.
Tell us what
Your
reality
builders
is,
aren't buying
Stan.
that.
I
Your
hate when my
builders-
banker
the
tells
builders
me
aren't
what
telling the
reality
homeowners,
is.
I'm going to do that for you. We're not going to pay that cost because it's just more cost that they don't get in profit. So they're not telling the homeowner that. They're just telling the homeowner, I get a 10-year warranty. You're good. That's just not reality in today's builder buying that. The banks not caring either because we're getting paid off when they sell the condo or the single-family home or the townhome. And when it's your own property as an apartment, you're responsible. I hear you. I think it's a great idea. It's just not reality from what we're seeing out there today.
I'm still not following you, Stan. What part's not reality? We know
pay
there's
for
a
that
homeowner
cost.
warranty requirement.
To pay for that insurance above and beyond what they have to provide to the homeowner.
Who's paying for the insurance?
Well,
Go ahead.
the contract is going to, by and large, bonds are not purchased until they're mandated by contract. We didn't have time to get into contracts and the requirements that are written in the contracts and how watered down coverage is of the insured when they add everybody and their mother under the sun under their coverage, because they wind up being last in that line of being indemnified for a claim. But what you're referring to is something different than what I was referring to. I want to make sure the crowd understands. Your general liability will not respond to construction defect. You will get it's a limited coverage. It is not a very broad coverage on the first year if there's a bond in place. And again, typically, I can tell you for sure, I've been in the business 23 years. We've never provided a bond unless it was required by contract. So, I mean, we've offered them, we've talked to people, they just don't buy them. And it's easier for typically, certainly when we had the heyday of the building, for the contractor to say, "We'll send our people. You just let us know you have a warranty." Then for
Well,
them
but
to
why
insure
wouldn't
that
I
person.
want to build into my contract with my general contractor that he's going to warranty his work for 10 years
No, you
based
should-
on
you-
that
you should.
declining? I should.
Yeah, you should.
And why shouldn't I make him get a bond to make sure that if he fails or bankrupts or whatever, there's somebody there to pay those bills?
No, you should. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I should.
Generally, they're not. Those policies people are not getting bonded unless it's required of them.
Which mean like by me
Yes.
as the developer.
Yes.
So Stan,
So that-
where am I missing here? You said this is all a
Well,
big
it
fiction.
comes down to what's the dollar. First of all, you're going to be able to sell that home to someone, right? And then therefore, what's your cost? And that's part of someone's cost. And at the end of the day, you're going to want to pass it along to the homeowner. And we're going to say that's not market. You got to be able to figure out best you can sell. What's your cost and where's your profit? That's one more cost that someone's not going to buy because it's not mandated, right? So as Frank said, if it was mandated, that's different. Like you need to get a bond for your site, but so no one's going to do that. There's
Well,
just not
I'm
gonna
already
happen.
mandated to pay the homeowner warranty that the developer has to buy.
That's right.
And if I tell my GC I want you to stand behind your work for that same declining scale of responsibilities over 10 years, he's going to charge me, you're saying.
Exactly.
And that's going to raise my cost.
Exactly.
And that's going to raise the cost to my condo buyer or my homeowner. And that's going to mean there's going to be less profit. Okay, so it's really the same old story. How much risk do you want to eat?
Right.
That's what it comes down to. If you're very risk averse, there are products out there like your products. If you say, you know what, I'm going to wing it a little bit here because I want to make as much possible money as I could make, then like Stan says, maybe you do without that sort of thing. It's a decision. And risk management is all about these exact same kinds of considerations and these exact same kinds of decisions. And, when you're speaking to an investor or a banker or a homeowner, I think there's some value to being able to say that you've addressed every single risk and you've covered it to the point that you can minimize or eliminate those risks. You've paid to do so. I think there's a benefit to that, but that's just me. Any other questions? Yes,
Just-
right there.
By
By the way, thank you for nodding. Every time we were saying something, you were nodding like you agreed with me. I love that. Thank you very much for nodding. Here's the mic right behind you there. Grab the mic. Tell us your name and what you do.
Jeffrey Enton, AKRF, Environmental Consulting and Remediation.
Okay.
Question for George, for you, for the panel.
Okay.
Obviously, we've had a privatization of the environmental programs in New Jersey from the command and control of DEP now to the LSRP program.
Great thing.
Starting with George, if you could, and I'd be interested to hear the other panelists, could you give us an idea of your opinion regarding the success or otherwise of the program? And I could tell you there's some legislation that we're looking at to help modify some things to make it better for construction and development, and that's what the business that you're in. If you can comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'll go first, and then I'll throw it out. So I think it's fabulous. In 2009, when they passed the Site Remediation Reform Act, which said that we're going to privatize the oversight of brownfield cleanups, I said, I like that idea, because I had done a whole bunch of them. And the problem was you had thousands of cases and you had 150 case managers at the DEP. And if you went into one of their offices, you would be like, oh my God, they had boxes piled to the ceiling in their office, and they're trying to, and they got a big 3-ring binders on their desk, and they're trying to get through this stuff and write notes and everything. It's like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. And it took forever to get your documents approved. You had to submit your preliminary assessment, wait for its approval. Your site investigation, wait for the approval. Your remedial investigation report, wait for an approval. Now, we used to telescope everything. We did the preliminary assessment, site investigation, remedial investigation report, remedial action work plan. We submit the whole thing in a box. It's called a telescoped application because we thought we did a really good job, and that shortened the time a little bit, but you're still talking 9 months, a year, sometimes longer. And God forbid one of those documents along that row was wrong. Everything after it had to be redone. So in 09, they passed the law. They gave it till 2012 to go live, and now we have licensed site remediation professionals you can hire and, importantly, fire, and they will oversee your cleanup costs. So here's the result in my world, and then we'll hear from everybody else. It costs more, but it's way faster. Because it costs more because the LSRPs, those are what they call the licensed site remediation professionals, everything's an acronym. The LSRPs, they're protecting their license now and their livelihood. So in the old days, under oversight, you had me and my environmental consultant on this side of the table and the DEP guy, the case manager, on that side of the table, and me and my consultant were trying to get this guy to go along with our thoughts. Now, it's me on this side of the table, and now my LSRP's over there, because he's essentially representing the DEP to do the case oversight process. I mean, in many respects, he is. He's got to make sure you follow the rules and the guidance and all the other stuff. So what they do is they make you be more thorough. This is what I find. They make you be more thorough. You do a much more thorough site investigation, which is expensive, and it takes some time. But at the end of the day, you get it all done faster, way faster. And the number one cost in that capital stack we talked about, the total cost of getting a project done, is the cost of capital. The cost of capital over time is the most expensive component. It's not concrete, it's not land, it's not labor, it's the cost of capital over time. And so the faster you can get a project done and get your time to market, shrink that time to market number, you're going to save big money. So I love the LSRP program. I'm a big proponent of it. I'm on 2 stakeholder committees at the DEP advising them on some of these changes, and I think it's great. So let me throw it out to the panel. What's your thoughts there? Stan?
We've taken back property over the years because of the downturn, and everything George said just seconded. The only thing I would caution you is, just like anything else, there are all types of LSRPs. Some are better than others. Find a really good one, because everything George says is right on. It makes the process happen. It's the best thing they could have finally did in that whole world.
Yep.
Agreed.
Nevins, agreed?
Agreed 100%.
All right. Who else? Frank?
Well, anytime something's going to go deeper and longer by regulation, there's usually a cost associated to it.
Yep.
With it, rather. And so, that certainly affects the insurance marketplace, because now the insurance marketplace has to adjust to the potential, what's called MPL, maximum probable loss on claims.
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly affects everything. Quite honestly, it runs right downhill.
Yep. And Scott, how are remediation costs treated in terms of your capital? Can you capitalize remediation costs? Can that go into your basis for a building? It can? Yeah. Okay. So you're going to get it included in your basis, which means it comes off your gain at the back end. You can't depreciate it, though, right? Unless it's hard assets. Like
Correct.
Dirt, you can't depreciate. But hard assets, pipes and vapor collection systems and all that stuff, that counts. Correct. And then you do that useful life thing again and maximize your depreciation write-offs.
Just like anything, you definitely need to do your tax planning and,
Yep.
and look at all these things.
Yep. Okay, next question. That was a good one. Anybody else? All right, right over here in the middle. Like it? No tie? I'm with you, man.
But he
Not a
doesn't have
millennial,
jeans
but
on.
I don't like
Millennial,
ties.
you know?
I went to Bergen Catholic High School. I had to wear a tie for 4 years. I was like,
I like the look.
and the brothers would grab you by the necktie when you did something wrong.
Yeah. So, Britton Zamoyda with Progress Capital. Just a question around the new opportunity zones. What is the benefit from an investor perspective, and what are some of the other benefits from a tax perspective?
Very good question, and very timely and topical. Have you on top of that yet? Have you studied the EOZs?
This is a new. This was a part of the new Tax Act, and it's something very new, where basically it's an incentive for developers to go into distressed areas and spur development and create jobs. Basically, where well, let me back up for a second. Basically, each state was required to submit a list of distressed areas for approval, and they submitted that to the Department of the Treasury. The Murphy administration was very quick to act on this, and they actually submitted their lists very early. And the government recently released a list. I haven't seen the list, but they released their list of all the areas that they approved. Basically the way it works, it's, regarding like-kind exchanges. The way a like-kind exchange would normally work is, you have a piece of property, you're going to take the profits from that property and roll it into a new property, and basically you're deferring your gain. The way this new program works is if you're investing in one of these distressed areas, you take your profit, you roll it into another property in those distressed areas, and if you hold that property for 10 years, when you sell that property after the 10-year period, basically what you're allowed to do is increase your basis in that property up to fair market value. So basically what you're doing is you're significantly reducing the cost. Instead of constantly deferring it, you're actually, cutting it down, and by raising your basis, you're significantly reducing or even eliminating your tax that you pay at the end of that period. So it's a great incentive for developers to go into these distressed areas because there's a huge tax gain that can be made at the end. It's something very new, and people aren't really talking about it at all because it is so
We're
new.
talking about it.
We are talking about it, but it's a really interesting program, and developers should really look into it because there are long-term benefits down the road.
Hey, Scott, will you get tax abatement too, like in the redevelopment zones with the opportunity?
You could, yeah, absolutely.
It's a separate track, but the answer is yes.
It's separate, yeah.
It's a separate track. The answer.
Separate, yeah.
This is actually one of the surprising things that government did that actually, I believe, works in a major way. I mean, this is bigly, just to coin a phrase. This is really about targeting investment where it's needed most. First of all, you had to have a qualifying census tract. To submit to the federal government, you had to have a qualifying census tract, which meant it was basically low income. And then, and so in New Jersey, there were, I'm trying to remember the name, I've been studying this since it first came out. I think there were like 600 of them. But we were only allowed to pick 25% of how many you have. So I think Jersey was allowed to do 125, something like that. So everybody submitted one. Everybody that had property in one of those 125 zones, you had to go to the mayor. The mayor recommended them to the governor. So there was this huge rush to the mayor's office. Please include my zone, include my zone. We even included some of our zones, which really don't deserve it, but because they're in the low-income tract, because the new development that's occurred since the last census, the income are set every 10 years in the census, and meanwhile our area is blown up and doesn't deserve it. But we asked anyway, what the heck. We were denied, of course, because it really didn't deserve it. But it's really good because it's really getting developers to go into those neighborhoods now and look out 10 years. A lot of what developers try to be good at is finding the emerging markets. Where is it that I can buy cheap now, but the market's going to migrate there and the values are going to go up? That's what we're all about. When I bought my first brownstone in Hoboken in 1980 at 210 3rd Street for $20,000, it was a 4-story brownstone that they were literally giving it away. And virtually everybody I talked to said, you guys are crazy. My dad grew up in Hudson County, and his best friend Stanley, who's a lawyer, stayed there. We moved up to Bergen County, where I grew up, but Stanley stayed down there, and he stayed friends with my dad. And my dad called him up and said, Stanley, my son and his partner are looking at buying this brownstone on 3rd Street in Hoboken for $20,000. What do you think? Stanley said, George, talk them out of it. You go below 4th Street in Hoboken, you're taking your life in your hands. So the other thing developers are good at is not listening to their dad. Anyway, another question. Yes? Well, let's see. Wait, you got one already. Do we have any other one? Let's do this one first, and then I'm going to come back to you, because I love the way you're nodding, but I got to spread it out a little bit.
How you doing? Leo Kushner with Sardoni Construction Company.
Okay.
Question for the panel regarding condos. You mentioned the new tax laws change with 10,000 limited property taxes, 750 for interest. And in your pro formas, you mentioned that you put in a line item for legal against the condo association. Do you guys see or expect a downtick in new construction for condos?
What do you guys think?
One of the things that we've seen in the, and I'm going to echo, what Evan and Stan said before, there's, in terms of we're talking about condos, but there's a lot of old inventory on the market out there. So we are seeing, and from our clients, we're seeing a lot of opportunities where, clients are getting into, building in those areas, going through urban renewal around train lines, things like that. You can go right down the train line going from Harrison to Elizabeth, Royal Linden. So, we're seeing a lot of opportunities in that area. So, we talked about the market being overbuilt, but, I don't know if it's necessarily overbuilt. I think there's a lot of older inventory out there that is spurring a demand for newer construction. And, the trend, 10, 15 years ago was that, people were moving away from the urban areas and moving out into the far suburbs, and now we're seeing the exact opposite trend, at least with our clients, where, they want to be near urban areas where there's entertainment, bars, restaurants, shopping, things like that. So, we're seeing a lot of development in that area.
Yeah.
Nevins?
So yeah, I think you're going to see some more condos being built. I think for the last 15 years it's been pretty much rental only, or 10 years. And there's a strong market for rental, but I think there are empty nesters that want to buy, people that are used to home ownership. So I do think there's an increasing market for condo.
Let me add a little bit to Nevins and Scott's comments, because I study this stuff like crazy. The demographics are definitely pointing toward a rapid growth in condo sales. Right now, the baby boom generation is about 68 million people. That's basically my generation. The millennial generation is a little bit larger, somewhere around 72 million. So you got 150 million people in a market right now that I believe is heading toward condo purchases. The millennials have been renting for a long time. The ones that are in their 20s and early 30s are still renting, for a large part because of a lot of the reasons Nevin said. Plus, they're still paying off student debt. They want to stay mobile. They're not sure about their career, where they're going to land for their career. Their career moves are very rapid. And so the younger cohort of the millennial generation, 22 to 32, is still renting, and they're still fueling the growth of rents. But the older cohort, which is the 32 to 40, they're settling down. They're finding their significant other. They're starting to form households, families, kids. They don't want to pay rent anymore. They want to pay their own mortgage, not somebody else's mortgage, which is what you do when you rent an apartment. The baby boomers they've been locked in their empty nester homes, in their empty nests, because there hasn't been a demand for those, but a significant amount of this second half, the older half of the millennial generation, is going to go back to the suburbs. I mean, contrary to popular opinion, they're not all staying in the cities. A lot of them want to have that single-family home with the yard, with the fence around it, and the swing set. So they're going to now start to unlock the baby boomers by buying up the baby boomers' homes that are empty. That's going to let the baby boomers do what they want to do. They want to move back to the urban areas. We're old and gray, but we still think we're young and hip, and we want to go to the city, and we want to go to the bar at night. We're not going to stay out till 2 in the morning. We're going to go home at 10:30, but we want to feel like we had dinner and had a drink in a bar. So we're going back to the cities too, and we're going to be buying condos. So I believe that the market for my talking is 1 more minute. One more question. Okay, so anyway, that's my answer to the question. Okay, last question in the back of the room. Get that man a mic. Tell us your name and what you do, sir.
Good morning. My name is Dwight Three Persons. I'm from NJIT. We're talking about the work being done in distressed areas, and I'm going to go completely off topic and tell you to look at what's going on at the other end. Now, you were talking about you get what you pay for and those types of things. You have to also remember that all of this money that's being spent in these areas has an impact on the people who live there. The kid who's going to a vocational school in Jersey City will hopefully be able to get a OSHA 10 or OSHA 30 certification through us. That will lower the insurance risk because they're safer workers, they're better workers. And so I'm just going to ask all of you that if you live in a community that has a CTE program, to get involved. They need people from the business world to step in and to tell them what's really going on so that they can improve their programs so that when kids get out of schools, or if they're in a Hudson Community College or Essex Community College, and then they step out into the workforce, they're going to be the ones moving into these condos anyway, a lot of them. Because I was a welder at one time in my prior life before I retired, and I was making well over $100,000. I'm too old for it now. You're talking about the baby boomers. I go to bed at 8:30. So, but the point is that there are people that are behind me that are boilermakers, who are pipe fitters, who are carpenters. I know women. There's one group now called Women the Brotherhood, which is a carpenters group that's encouraging women to come in. Those people are making very good money. And even if they're not in the union, they're still making good money. So I'm just asking all of you, because you live in communities, most of us live in New Jersey, that if you live near a place that has this TTE program, go in and get involved. They need business to come in and give their input and their ideas, because those are the future workers who build these things. That's where this quality comes from.
So wait, don't give the mic up yet. So you got a room full of business people here. So
Yes.
What can they do? I mean, you said, come in, get involved. That's a little general. I know you
Okay.
academic guys, we need you to be more specific.
Well,
what can guys in here do if they want to help?
Okay, well, for example, a lot of, I live in Edgewater. I used to live in Teaneck. I sold my house there after living there 30 years. And when we moved to Edgewater, one of my friends is on the advisory board for the Bergen Technical Schools. The best thing for you to do is to just contact the school district. Look, I have contact with a very large number of these places. Mm-hmm. If you want me to direct you or give you some directions, I'll be happy to provide information for you. But the best thing really is just look in your own backyard. Mm-hmm. If you live in Hudson County, they have a very extensive community college program. Yep. They do have a need for people to sit on advisory boards at the local level. If you live in a town, like I said before, that has a career technical program of some kind, if your kids are in that school district, call up the superintendent or speak to someone there who can give you information. Superintendents in a lot of these places are very happy to have someone who's in real estate or a business owner to sit in and talk to them and give them advice, because you and I both know that you're talking about people moving into these communities. What's the first thing to look at? The quality of the school district.
Yep.
And look, I didn't go to Harvard or Yale in the beginning. I went to a vocational school. I worked in the shipyards. I went into the Navy. I was a welder the whole time, though, and that put food on the table. But then I went back to school later. So all I'm saying is that contact your local school district. If you don't really know someone, I'll give you my card. I'll be happy to put you in contact with someone wherever you are in the state.
That's great point. NJBIZ is about the business of New Jersey, and all of us, I'm assuming, are pretty successful because you can spend a half a day here listening to us. And I think it's great if you give back. And we do internships, we do mentoring at our company. And when you say, internships, God, sounds like a lot of work. It's really not a lot of work. All you basically do is you have some young smart kid who's been studying all their life and has no idea how to go out there and make a living, and you're just letting them follow you around. We call it shadowing, job shadowing. They follow you to appointments, they listen in. When you're driving there, you talk to them and they ask you questions. They sit there listen to conference calls on speakerphones. And at the end of the day, I've had kids tell me, holy mackerel, I never knew what a real estate developer actually did for a living. What we really do is we talk all day, and we're like these orchestra leaders that can't play a single instrument, but we know the score and we know what it should sound like. Okay, I think we're done. We're going to go with one more question. Where is it?
Raphael
there.
Kaysen, New
Could you
Jersey
stand
Community.
up, tell us your name, what you do.
Raphael Kaysen with New Jersey Community Capital. We're a CDFI based in New Brunswick, but we work statewide.
Okay.
A little bit in Florida as well, actually.
All right, wait a minute. What's a CDFI?
Apologies. Community Development Financial Institution. We're essentially a nonprofit bank, but we work with other nonprofits. So a lot of the affordable housing, economic development work that gets done. We do a lot of work with new market tax credits. We work with other CDCs or community development corporations to work in places, well, they weren't called opportunity zones until recently, but now they're known as opportunity zones. I'm with a program actually called Address Yourself, which is a demand-side program where we've partnered with housing counselors and the federal credit unions to create a sustainable pipeline of ready buyers for both affordable and market-rate homes. One unique aspect is that we will work with ITIN borrowers where no commercial bank will. All right, enough of the plug. I really appreciate what George said in terms of the demographic trends, and I'm wondering if you can look back into your crystal ball, and do you see any growth in the single-family market in the coming years based on what you're talking about in terms of the millennials, I guess you consider, by your estimation on one of them, on the back end, moving back into the suburbs? Either rehab or new construction.
The short answer is not much. And there's really two reasons for that. The obvious reason is the stuff we've been talking about all morning, is that the growth is in the urban areas. The millennials want to be there and the baby boomers want to be there. So that's really where the demand is. That's the easy answer. That's the obvious answer. The less easy obvious answer is we don't have a lot of developable land left in the urban and suburban and rural areas of New Jersey. We are the most densely populated state in the entire country, and that's because we have two huge engines on either end of us, New York and Philly, plus our own big five cities. And so there's just not that much developable land out there anymore. So it's really those two things that lead me to say not much demand for single-family housing in the future of New Jersey.
I'm going to push you a little bit on that. I live in Union County.
Hold on.
I love to be pushed.
Hold on. George,
Oh, sorry.
yours is not the only opinion in the room.
Stan, please, let's hear from the... He said he wanted to hear from George, but I got to let my banker talk or there could be big trouble for me in the future.
George is a North Jersey guy, but there is land in something south of Trenton, okay?
Is that Virginia? What's down south of Trenton?
It's another state, but it is called South Jersey, all right? So in North Jersey, there is no land, so everything's vertical. But in South Jersey, when you get down south, there is land. So there is. I am financing a few developments as you speak. Now, the single-family homes are not the McMansions anymore, George, but they are the smaller 2,000 square foot homes. They're no longer 3,500 to 4,500 square foot homes. And more, age-restricted communities, whether they're done by KHOV or any of the other communities out there, are looking for single-family because they still want that little yard. They want to be able to plant their garden, right? So you'll see a lot of that happening in the next few years as you go south where there's land. So that's horizontal, north is vertical. But there is happening as we speak, not of the same magnitude of permits that you're hearing from George, but you're seeing it, and you're seeing it even the starter families after they have their first kid. They want to get out of the condo. It's no different, but they're now 35 instead of 25. Yep. All right, and they want that single-family home from the townhome or from the condo or apartment from North Jersey. It is still out there, not of the same size, but it's out there, George.
No, you're right. I stand corrected. It's true. Who the hell would want to live in South? Oh, did I say that? No. Sorry. I'm an urban guy. I make no apologies. All right, so I think we're done.
That's it.
I want to invite our editor, Howard Burns, to come up for a couple closing remarks. On his way up here, I'd like you to give my friends a great round of applause. Thank you very much. I got a cold. I don't want anybody else to drink out of this.
And I'd like to thank George for the great job that he did moderating the panel. And George, I would like to personally invite you to our next panel session, the business of cannabis, on May 22nd. I would also like to thank Anna Acquaviva and our events team for the wonderful job that they did this morning. So coverage of this panel will be in not next week's issue, but the issue after, which I believe is the 30th, so please look for that. And a recording of this panel will also be on our YouTube channel. So if you missed anything or you want to hear it again, it's there for you. Also, for those of you who are not currently NJBIZ subscribers, we have a complimentary 16-week subscription offer that you can sign up for on your way out. And if you're not a reader, please sign up and check us out. So anyway, thank you very much for attending this morning. We'll see you again next month.